Have you ever stopped to think that hidden in the silent ruins of an ancient Mayan city might be stored not only the memory of a civilization, but also the genetic signature of a people who shaped part of the history of the American continent? Imagine walking through the dense forests of Honduras, crossing the invisible border that separates the present from the past, until you come across the stone pyramids of Copan, a city that over 1,000 years ago vibrated with life, rituals, commerce, and astronomical wisdom. Today these temples remain immobile, but in every stone and more deeply in every buried bone, answers still echo that modern science is beginning to decipher. And it is precisely through ancient DNA that this history is being rewritten before our eyes. Copan wasn't just any city. It was a center of power, art, and science during the classic period of the Mayan civilization between 250 and 950 AD. Located in the extreme southeast of the Mayan world, almost on the border between Honduras and Guatemala, it served as a meeting point for cultures, ideas, and trade routes. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the bustling plazas, the markets filled with artisans and merchants, the religious ceremonies that united thousands around faith, while the rulers, descendants of a dynasty, started by an enigmatic leader named Kinich Yaxcauk Mo, consolidated their power in luxurious palaces and lofty temples. But how could such a grand city, capable of erecting monuments that defy time, crumble in such a short time? Why did construction suddenly cease, the population decline drastically, and rituals lose their power? For centuries, archaeologists and historians have searched for answers. Some point to devastating droughts, others to political crises, and many to the inability of agriculture to sustain a growing population. But now, genetics brings a new dimension to this mystery. Researchers analyzed the remains of 7 individuals buried in Copan, dating precisely from the city's flourishing period. Among them, 2 men reveal contrasting and powerful stories. The first, known as CPM-13, was buried in a tomb richly adorned with jade, ceramics, and precious objects, clear evidence that he was part of the ruling elite. His death was not merely a farewell, it was a celebration of status, marked by luxury that reflected the grandeur of the dynasty that ruled the city. The second, identified as CPM-12, met a very different fate. He was buried in a position indicative of human sacrifice, perhaps offered to the gods as part of a religious or political pact. The proximity between the two, both physical and temporal, demonstrates how Copan was a place of contrasts, where splendor and violence coexisted. When scientists extracted and sequenced the DNA of these individuals, a fascinating discovery emerged. Both shared a paternal lineage called Q1b, passed down from father to son, like a surname engraved in their blood. This lineage is common among indigenous populations in the Americas to this day, demonstrating a direct connection between the inhabitants of Copan and the native peoples who still inhabit the continent. However, despite sharing this genetic heritage, CPM-12 and CPM-13 were not closely related. They were members of the same genetic tradition, but lived completely different paths within the Mayan social hierarchy. The other 5 individuals analyzed, 3 women and 2 men, brought even more complexity to the story. Their maternal DNA, passed down from generation to generation only by their mothers, revealed lineages known as A2 and C1. These lineages are found in various regions of the Americas, from Alaska to Argentina. This means that, even in a center as culturally defined as Copan, there was diversity, mixing and circulation of people from different origins. It was as if the city were a melting pot, where genetic and cultural influences met, further enriching the Mayan identity. But the importance of this study goes beyond the 7 individuals analyzed. When the researchers compared their genomes with DNA databases of ancient and modern peoples from Siberia, North, Central, and South America, an extraordinary pattern emerged. There was a line of continuity connecting the inhabitants of Copan to much older populations, dating back to the late Archaic period between 5,600 and 3,700 BC. In other words, Mayan identity did not emerge suddenly, but was built over millennia, with deep roots that spanned time until it blossomed into the grandeur of the classical era. This revelation changes the way we understand who the Mayans were. They were not an isolated people who arose and disappeared in a short space of time. They were heirs to ancestral traditions, genetically linked to populations that already inhabited the region long before the flourishing of Copan. And even more impressive, this continuity has not been completely broken. Today, more than 7 million descendants of the Mayans live scattered throughout Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, carrying with them fragments of this same DNA that is now analyzed in modern laboratories. However, DNA doesn't just speak of continuity, it also reveals change. By analyzing the genetic makeup, scientists identified something curious. About 6% of the ancestry of Copan's inhabitants came from populations of the Mexican highlands, such as the Zapotecs of Oaxaca. This influence began to appear around 250 to 550 AD in the early Classic period and intensified in the following centuries. This means that Copan was not isolated. On the contrary, it was a center of cultural, political, and genetic exchange. People from different regions integrated into the city, bringing with them new ideas, new traditions, and of course new genes. This blend becomes even more evident when we consider the figure of Kinich Yax Kukmo himself, the founder of the Copan dynasty. Ancient inscriptions suggest that he was not originally from the city, but an outsider who arrived in 427 AD and established a lineage that would rule for nearly 4 centuries. He may have been a living example of this fusion between the local and the foreign, between tradition and novelty. His legacy was a kingdom that combined internal and external elements to create a vibrant culture, expressed in impressive sculptures, astronomical observatories, and palaces that still amaze us today. At the same time, isotopic analysis, the study of the chemical composition of teeth and bones, supports this view. Many members of Copan's elite were not born there. Their childhood diet, recorded in tooth enamel, indicates they came from other regions before settling in the city. This shows that the elite was not merely local, but comprised individuals who brought with them external connections, political alliances, and perhaps even internal tensions. What's fascinating is seeing how genetics confirms what archaeology already suggested. Copan was a meeting point, a place where diverse peoples met, forged bonds, and together built one of the most complex civilizations in the Americas. But, as we'll see, this cultural and biological richness also carried within it the seeds of instability. The same diversity that strengthened the city in times of prosperity could become a challenge in times of crisis, when political disputes, social inequalities, and environmental pressures would test the resilience of Mayan society. For now, what emerges from the DNA is a vibrant portrait of the true Mayan identity, a people shaped by corn, heirs to ancient traditions, connected to peoples from across the Americas, and open to external influences that integrated themselves into the social and genetic fabric of Copan. It's a story that combines continuity and change, tradition and adaptation. But this is only the beginning. DNA also leads us to understand why such an extraordinary civilization fell into ruin, and this is the path we will follow next. If the first part of this story showed us the grandeur of the Mayan civilization and the richness of its genetic identity, now DNA leads us into darker territory, the path that led Copan and other cities to ruin. To understand this downfall, we must look to the silent pressures that built behind the stone walls, to the secrets engraved not only in the monuments, but also in the genes and bones of those who lived and died amid the collapse. Ancient DNA reveals something crucial. During the height of the Classic period, around 730 AD, Copan experienced significant population growth. Analyses show that the city reached an effective size of approximately 19,000 people, actively contributing to the gene pool. It's important to understand that effective size doesn't mean the total number of inhabitants, but rather the number of individuals of reproductive age who passed on their genes to future generations. This suggests that the total population was even larger, perhaps tens of thousands living in the Copan Valley. This population explosion was made possible by the expansion of agriculture, particularly corn, which was not just food, but the center of Mayan life, economy, and even spirituality. Myths described them as children of corn, and in a sense this plant literally sustained their survival. But as the population grew, the pressure on the land increased. The fertile soil of the Copan Valley was exploited to its limits, and ever-increasing areas were cleared to make way for plantations. Harvests had to feed rulers, priests, artisans, laborers, and slaves. The abundance that once sustained prosperity began to turn into vulnerability. DNA confirms this shift, indicating a population decline beginning around 750 AD, a genetic signal that something profound was happening. It's as if the inhabitants' own biology registered the decline of a society that was beginning to collapse. But agriculture alone doesn't explain everything. The archaeological record shows that between the 9th and 11th centuries, the region faced prolonged and devastating droughts. Imagine years of scarce rainfall, fields cracked by the sun, corn that wouldn't germinate, water reserves drying up. For a society so dependent on its agricultural base, this was a mortal blow. DNA may not directly record the drought, but it carries traces of the population decline it caused. Entire families disappeared from the genetic line. Villages were abandoned. Famine eroded the foundations of the Mayan Empire. And as if nature's turn against them weren't enough, human tensions intensified. Copan wasn't an island. It was part of a network of city-states that frequently vied for power and influence. Rivals like Tikal and Calakmul fought wars that directly affected alliances and political stability. DNA, combined with inscriptions and archaeological evidence, suggests that the arrival of outside groups from the Mexican highlands brought both cultural richness and potential internal conflicts. In times of abundance, these mixtures strengthened the city. In times of crisis, they could generate tensions, power struggles, and rivalries. Within Copan itself, social inequality became increasingly visible. While members of the elite were buried in tombs adorned with jade and refined ceramics, commoners had simple burials with almost no offerings. This contrast is evident in the case of CPM 13, the ruler buried with wealth, and CPM 12, possibly sacrificed in honor of the gods. This stark difference between privilege and suffering fueled social tensions. The people who worked tirelessly to maintain the fields and build the temples bore the burden of the elite's luxury. Genetics shows that everyone was part of the same biological community, but life in Copan was not equal for everyone. The final collapse came in waves. First, major construction slowed. Temples that had once risen at a frenetic pace ceased to be built. Then, the population began to disappear from the genetic and archaeological records. Around 820 AD, the political system collapsed. The last king of Copan, Yaks Pasaj Chan Yopat, struggled to maintain his authority, but he already ruled over a weakened city where hunger, instability, and disbelief were eroding power structures. DNA evidence indicates that families were shrinking, that genetic diversity was shrinking, reflecting a shrinking community. And yet, despite the ruin, the story didn't end there. Ancient DNA reveals a deep connection between past and present. The genetic lineages identified at Copan, the Y chromosome type Q1b and the maternal haplogroups A2 and C1, remain alive today in millions of people descended from the Maya. This means that, even though the city fell, the people did not disappear. They transformed, spread, and adapted. This continuity is a reminder that civilizations may crumble, but identities endure. Furthermore, the study of Mayan DNA connects us to an even older narrative, that of the first human migrations that crossed the Bering Land Bridge more than 15,000 years ago, coming from Siberia to North America. Every DNA fragment found at Copan carries this ancestral thread, linking the Mayans to the populations that have roamed the Americas since time immemorial. It's as if, by deciphering their genes, we can glimpse not just the collapse of a city, but the journey of an entire humanity in motion. The future of science promises to reveal even more. Advanced sequencing. Technologies already allow us to detect epigenetic signals, which show how the environment affected gene expression. This means that we will soon be able to identify in ancient DNA the direct effects of drought, famine, and even the stress experienced by the Mayans. We will also be able to recover DNA fragments from pathogens, revealing the diseases that spread through cities, or reconstruct trade routes by analyzing microscopic residues in bones and teeth. DNA is a silent but increasingly readable archive, capable of telling stories that previously seemed unattainable. Today, when we look at the ruins of Copan, we don't just see ancient stones covered in vegetation. We see a palimpsest of lives, a mosaic of voices that time tried to erase, but that science is bringing back. We see the grandeur of a civilization that knew how to build temples and observatories, calculate eclipses, and rule empires, but that also faced inequality, hunger, and fragility in the face of nature. We see above all the lesson that human identity is not lost. It adapts, transforms, and reinvents itself. And this is the great revelation of ancient DNA. It not only reveals who the Maya really were, but also teaches us why they fell into ruin. It was a combination of factors: agricultural pressure, relentless droughts, political and social tensions that led to their collapse. But it was also the resilience of their people that ensured that, even after their fall, their essence remained alive, coursing through the veins of millions of descendants today. If this story touched you, remember, DNA isn't just science, it's memory. It's proof that no civilization disappears completely. Leave a comment telling us what impressed you most about the Mayans. Was it the grandeur of Copan, the human sacrifices, their resilience in the face of droughts, or the fact that they still live on through their descendants? We want to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story so more people can discover how DNA can reveal secrets of the past and inspire reflections on the future. Because, ultimately, knowing the fate of the Mayans is also a better understanding of our own journey as humanity.